Eli, how you doing? It's good to see you.
Always a pleasure, my man. Always a pleasure.
I'd love to talk to you about the work that you do as a animator and an illustrator, and kind of what it's like day in the life with you and your projects. So, would you be able to start with your name and what you do?
Hi, I'm Elijah Isaiah Johnson. I am an illustrator and an animator for anime hip hop, and I worked on several projects, including for Paramount and MTV, BET, and many more companies and projects like that.
That's great. What is it like to on like day one of starting an animated project?
Day one is always just technical stuff. Like it's the very unsexy part of the industry, as I like to call it, because you're just kind of talking logistics, a production pipeline, estimates for dates and for turnarounds for assets and things like that. So most of the time we're just kind of establishing the preliminary bones of the project, who's going to be doing what. As the lead animator, my job is kind of to, if I'm working with a larger team, my job is to ultimately kind of oversee things and then assemble the pieces once they're done. If the team's a little scaled down, but I'm a little bit more hands-on in actually creating each slide and each animation and getting a little bit more involved. And that's all something that we do essentially through the storyboarding phase. So a lot of the times, if a company approaches us, they'll bring something like a script, or if we're doing our own production, we'll have a script, and then I storyboard to that. And essentially, once we have the storyboards, that's when we can go into some of the final slides and some of the final images that we're actually going to be rendering out and doing in a complete way. So that's essentially the most important part is also probably the slowest part of the process. But that's where you work out all the kinks and determine if the project's really going to be great or not is in that initial stage.
Yes. Who do you typically collaborate with? Who's the first person that reaches out to you as far as getting a project started?
Usually it's going to be Eric McElroy. He's the head of anime hip hop. He does a lot of the correspondence with all of our clients, and he'll come up with, different leads and things like that for the company that we actually have to flesh out. Um, and usually he handles a lot of the legwork as far as like what needs to be done, what needs to be created, scheduling, and keeping everyone on top of things. After that, then usually he'll put it my way if it's an animated project, and that's the point where we kind of figure out, okay, let's get an estimate on how long this is going to take, like how many people I'm going to need involved, and things like that.
Yeah, what's one of the challenges or one of the things that you guys have to deal with as an animation company to be able to get the product out?
I think initially in the first couple of years was just scale, because we have some very ambitious projects and very ambitious ideas, and we're a smaller operation at the moment. So the one thing that we're really trying to do is do things that feel a lot more high end, things that have a lot more dynamism to them. And I
Mhm.
think one of the challenges with that initially was just the personnel, the manpower. So this year we're taking a little bit of a different approach, and I don't want to give too much away because things are still in the works, but we're going to have a lot more hands involved in actually getting the content out and creating things, because that's one of the things that we learned initially on was to sort of have more of a team, have more of a team, because I think we learned a lot early on, and we learned some lessons the hard way. But sometimes that's how you have to do it to kind of, figure out what the best pathway forward is. And so that's one of the hiccups that I think we're going to be able to overcome this year and really, really have things at a good scale.
Right. And for example, what's the programs that you guys typically like to work with just to kind of like for the workflow, or is there any ones that you suggest?
Typically, Adobe products, those are kind of like the universal standard, right? So you
Yeah.
have Adobe Photoshop, Adobe Illustrator, After Effects is the primary thing when I'm doing animations, and then you can, export the project files and everything like that. That's the same thing I did when I was working on Beyond the Aggressives 25 years later. It was a documentary that came on Showtime and Paramount, the streaming platforms, and was also had a theatrical release. I was making the title sequence for that, and like the first introductory part, they needed some VFX and things like that for that one. And so it was super, super helpful that that team also had After Effects, that we were able to just export everything. Everything was connected. All the assets were in place. There was no disconnect on source files. So I would say, really, really invest in an Adobe Suite if you're trying to get into that field, if you're trying to get into this lane. That's going to be the universal language, I feel like.
Right. Yeah, that's definitely one of the key parts of pursuing a career like that. But I'm also interested in talking to you about the illustration side of your talent. Can you tell us a little bit more of the projects that you're working on in illustration?
Currently, I'm working on a couple of things. I just did a piece for the Newark Water Coalition in New Jersey, a short film. We just did an animate, not animated, sorry. We just did an illustrated strip, about a couple pages long, sort of educating kids about, clean water, clean energy, and things like that. And
Yeah,
so they're having me produce another animated short very soon, which is in the works. That's going to continue that messaging. That's one of the things I'm very excited about because I always kind of like to use the platform to get an important message out there. Like I don't want to make things that just look cool.
right.
Sort of have like some sort of a social impact as well. Because I think otherwise, you got to use the platform for something. You got to have some sort of a substance to it. So I'm very passionate about that. Other things that are in the pipeline currently, I'm working with an amazing writer. He did some work at Warner Brothers for a time. We're working on a Western series, and it stars like a black protagonist. He's a sheep cowboy. He's a cowboy, and it's called Sheriff Right. And so that's in the pipeline as well. He's already got the first 2 or 3 issues out already, I believe. It's from Urban Legends Media. That's the company.
Okay.
And I'm super excited about that one. I actually should probably go over that with you after the fact, Hugo, because I know you're in that Western space as well. Um,
Yeah, that absolutely. And I'm glad you brought that up because you were the first person that I reached out to whenever I wanted to get that project out and give it some life. So with you, I was able to collaborate ideas and also figure out what it takes to get something like that off the ground. So can you tell us a little bit about how you got your own personal projects like the Formula series and how all that stuff got started?
so the formula was something that my brother and my dad, we all started together so many years ago now. In your case, when things came around, crowdfunding wasn't something that was I've had some experience with it already, having done, I don't want to say dozens of campaigns, but it's probably dozens of campaigns with other clients who we've been
Okay.
able to launch like very successfully. So when you'd asked me about, how to get Viator out to like a bigger crowd, crowdfunding was made the most sense to me because that was something I had a lot of success with. And yeah, I think it's the most direct, most efficient way to probably get your project out there because not only do you have to build your audience
Mhm.
from scratch, and ultimately that's going to translate into the sales further down the road, but you also have to have your business plan and have your structure when you're sort of approaching it. Like what are the rewards? What are you giving people? What are the incentives? How do you market this thing? How do you advertise? So essentially, when you do crowdfunding, it's like a small business that you're running, and you can create the fans, you can create the audience, you can gauge the audience from that, and then you can actually get the funds secured to actually put your project out there. So, and one thing that happens oftentimes with crowdfunding is sometimes people will underestimate like the amount of funds that they need.
Yeah.
Um, but I think a lot of the time, if you start in a really good place, and that's the preliminary work again, which is kind of like getting those fans, starting that audience, making those pages where people can actually, where you're going to be able to put this out, and at least you can kind of gauge the percentage of your audience that will support this book. That's when you can kind of budget around that. And so that was like my biggest thing about crowdfunding. And the formula was something that my brother and my dad and myself we put out actually through a publisher. So that one of all the books is one that we did not crowdfund. We put it out through Friesen Press, which is a Canadian publishing house, and they did one of the early editions of Harry Potter. And they really taught us a lot about actually publishing, just like self-publishing the work through a publisher as well. All the stores that it has to go to, the different formats that we can publish in. That was something that we really tried to do at scale, and they were extremely helpful in getting us to do that. But for anybody who's really trying to do it for the first time, dip your toes in, and I would say crowdfunding is the way to go.
Yeah, absolutely. And the one thing that you brought up to me and that you're really good at doing as well is to getting out there. For example, we were able to collaborate LA Comic Con and just to be able to engage and really be out there to talk to people in real person, like real life. And it was something that I didn't even have in mind yet when I was building that campaign. So, how do you like to build your audience?
Organically as possible. I think I probably would have maybe like double the numbers if I was like a little bit more, aggressive with advertising and things like that, which I definitely do recommend that. But I think the biggest success that we've had and the most funds that we've been able to generate is just doing the convention circuit.
Mm,
Is actually going out and meeting people because you have to go to where the customers are. And I think things can get lost a lot of the time online because there's so much competition, there's so much saturation. Your thing can kind of fall through the cracks. So when we did, that was our first Comic Con that you actually attended with us, and like that was one of my favorite moments I think of that year. Because I think that also helped you get a chance to see that what the audience and what that space looked like and what kind of being on the convention floor looked like and sort of like, having that product out there and how to interact with the fans and generating that interest organically. And that's something I would seriously recommend is to get out there. And it's not cheap. Let's preface it with that. Doing conventions is not cheap. You have to purchase the booth and all the books and all these things that come with it. But I recommend that because that's going to really determine, going forward how you want to actually approach, your advertising and how you want to put things out there. What kind of people read my book? What kind of people are interested in my book when I stop and go out there? So it's a really great temperature check to be able to get out there and actually do that physically. Online, I think the best way to generate is just to collaborate with people, honestly.
yes.
I think a lot of my views outside of just my own work and publishing stuff is the work that I do with, entertainment news. So like I do a lot of red carpets and events and things like that. We cover a lot of things like that. And I know we're probably going to touch on that in a few, but that's collaborating and cross promoting is a great way, I think, when you're working with other creators and other coaches to actually get more exposure.
Yeah, I would love to talk about the work that you do outside of animation and illustration. I've seen you at red carpets. I've seen you do these interviews for these upcoming movies and TV shows. How did you come across getting involved with stuff like that?
That story is always a funny one to tell. That's, I didn't even know people could actually do that as a job. Like I remember watching Ebert and Roper growing up,
Yeah,
just like two guys talking about movies, and I didn't know that was actually a job. So when my friend Ron, who I met through another friend of mine, Corey, who we wrote a book together, a series called Leaders of the Free World some years ago,
yeah.
introduced me to Ron. Ron was not able to attend the screening that was happening in Burbank because he was going to be in Orange County at the time. So
Oh,
he was like, I know you actually live close by, so would you like to just fill in for me? And totally just out of the blue, I didn't know what to expect. I'd never done a screening or anything like that. I didn't know the protocol, but he set everything up and then I just attended. And so I get to the theater and it was Encanto was the film at the time. And so
oh,
I
gotcha.
remember walking into the theater and I just vaguely sort of knew what Ron did. And so when I got there, I was like, this is interesting because I'm in this room and I love everybody, but like I was in the room and I'm seeing all these people who don't look like us. And they're like, they're gonna leave this movie with a very different perspective than I will. And like
Yeah,
I don't want to like make it so that I'm just gassing up films just because like there's some sort of an allegiance to it or anything like that. But I do want to provide some sort of an authentic perspective or a perspective that's closer to, the people that are being represented on screen. And so
right.
from that first film, I wrote a review. That review actually, they took a poll quote from it and used it for the marketing campaign for Encanto on Twitter. That was like my first review ever. But I said, I think I want to like actually get into this regularly because I want to provide coverage to films that maybe wouldn't get, as much press or like they don't get a certain demographic or like they don't get as much a bigger budget, when the studios are doing promo, they might allot the budget to a film with, a more homogenous cast, So I wanted to be there and kind of like fill in the gap as much as I could to be able to provide another perspective on films that have people of color, which is why I think I've been able to represent POC culture, which is the outlet, and
Yeah.
around so long, and just to been able to do that has really been a pleasure of mine.
Yeah, it's really cool to see, and I'm really glad that I enjoy the questions that you ask. I like the direction that you take the interview and the conversation, and you always make them very comfortable with you. And I assume it's the first time you meet some of these people, so I think that's really cool that you're able to bring that organic conversation and insight about the project.
Yeah, and that's I want to actually give a shout out to Nancy Tapia. She was one of the first people that I ever met doing a press junket like on the carpet. There's like three really important people in that journey: is Young Chavez, Kieran, and Nancy Tapia. But Nancy gave me the best advice that I still use to this day, which is just have a conversation.
Yeah.
I was so nervous to like have to sit down. It was for the Black Adam press junket, and I was just so nervous. I'm like, how do I introduce this? Like, I've never done this. And, we were waiting in the hallway before going into the room. They give everybody like 5, 10 minutes to talk to everyone on
Yeah.
the at a time. And so she just said, just have a conversation. So I'm like, I know how to do that. But that was the approach that I've taken ever since. And
Uh-huh.
I always kind of want to lead with, you know, of course, customarily you have to lead with sort of like the basic stuff, what got you interested in this and that. But the same way I approach my reviews, I try to approach my interviews in the sense that I want to look between the lines and like get into the creator's mind, right? Like, why did you choose this specific region to film in? Why did you choose this, specific theme throughout the story? And so I like to bring those questions to the cast and the creatives. Like, what made you want to make this? Like, there's so many different responses you can get because I think viewers only kind of get to see the finished result, but I always kind of like to know the process of things, why it came that way, like what inspired that,
Right.
or was this a personal story to you? And for the actors, you find a lot of really interesting answers a lot of the time, why they would join a project like Black Adam or, this or that. And so those kinds of questions are the things that I think really help people to open up because I don't want to ask what they've been asked before. I always want to ask something that's correct.
Exactly. Just jumping back into the illustration part, and just because I think that I would love to hear from you, just for somebody that wants to start their own project and launch their own idea, what is the first thing that you do, or what do you recommend that they get down first?
I think it kind of depends. If you're doing everything solo, I definitely want to say, get as many eyes on it as you can through, again, cross promotion. If you can partner up or pair up or get mentions or shout outs by different pages, do interviews. Like when we were doing before when we were getting it out there, one thing we looked for was like different podcasts to appear on, like different
Right.
comic book artist podcasts, different, news outlets like CBR or Bleeding Cool or Bleeding Cool. There's so many different companies out there that will, feature your work. And I think a lot of people when they start out, they don't know that. They think they're just kind of like throwing their project out in the wind. And one thing is like you don't actually have to do that. There's so many ways to market organically, to like cross promote and to get your thing out there. Because the most important thing is that you're happy with it, but the most important thing is that people actually see it. Because we don't just want to be talking to ourselves. We want the books to go to the audience. We want them to go through.
Yeah.
So it's the same thing when I was we were talking about doing the crowdfunding is build that audience. Even before the story comes out, if you can find, if you're not an artist and you want to bring an artist on, you're just a writer, bring an artist on, get some concept images done, and then put those out into the world and get a conversation going online about that. But if you're an artist and a writer, just really treat it like, you're a company, you have a product you're trying to sell, and you have to kind of be your own marketing team. You have to be your own biggest advocate in a sense. And I think don't be afraid of that. I think a lot of people are like scared. Because as artists, we don't want to do the technical stuff. We don't want to do the legalities. We don't want to do the copyrights. We don't want to do all these different things. But don't be afraid to do that. I would say try to get all of that technical stuff out of the way first. That's when you can like put your work into the world confidently. You know you did everything right. then you can just have fun and be an artist, you know? I think handle the hard stuff first and then just be an artist.
Yeah, one of my favorite things so far with my Vallero journey was to collaborate with all kinds of artists from like pencil realistic art to animation to collaborating with you and getting more ideas down and expanding that universe to even things that I didn't even think about kind of contributing to. But yeah, I think, like you said, it's very important to make sure that you have that plan to be able to get out there and connect with your core audience.
100%. 100% because we're all making this for somebody. And I think, there's that joke where somebody pitches something to a company and they ask, who's this for? And everyone always wants to say it's for everybody. But, I think once you kind of like figure out who exactly is interested in the work that you do, if it's people, because I know you said Vito initially had like a big response like in Italy and in like in Europe where they have those spaghetti westerns. But that was something you had to know ahead of time, and then you can kind of like push it out there a little bit more, and then you can kind of do the local rounds and the more domestic rounds. But you found that audience was more international just initially, and hopefully that was more of a strength when you actually got the book out there. So I would recommend people to always do that, to do the legwork and find out what you can about what you're going to put out first.
Right. For me, I kind of had a little bit of an idea of who this was for. But then once it really did get out there and you're able to see the details and the notes from, for example, Kickstarter, you start seeing that you're getting more clicks overseas, for example, for me. And that's something that I never took it into consideration. So that's why I took the initiative to start translating the books and start getting that moving forward, which originally was not even part of the plan.
Yeah, and do you feel, and to ask you a question now, do you feel like that has really helped with the books or not? Like, do you feel like that has been one of the strengths is having it published in more languages? Do you feel like that's been able to grow the audience organically, or do you feel like it kind of just balanced out, releasing it domestically versus internationally?
Yeah, I learned that people are very well rounded with languages. So, for example, I found this out visiting Mexico that a lot of the people there do speak English and also read it. So they were interested in receiving the stories in the native language, where like in English. I was still interested to cater to those who possibly didn't know the language. So in the end, I ended up doing a dual book that had the English version and the Spanish version as one copy. So you would get both versions with your purchase.
I love that. That's awesome.
And
That's
I had never seen that before, so I thought that was an interesting way to put out a new project out and to kind of advertise it that way.
Yeah, and that's actually, I love that you said that because that's something I would recommend to creators. First time they're like experienced creators is find what makes your project stand out. Like
Right.
you always want to try to introduce people to something that I haven't seen before,
Yeah.
whether that's the story or even if it is the approach to the marketing. Like having a multilingual book is like in the indie space, maybe like a bigger publisher can do that. Usually you'll find like go overseas and you'll find a collection that's in Spanish or something, but a lot of indie independent, creators, they just publish in the one language, but you were really thinking outside the box by actually having it in different languages. And I feel like that's something that makes that project more universal, but also really stand out on its own. So I love that you're able to sort of find that space where you could have your own lane.
Yeah, no, it was a lot of fun to do that because it was that like having it translated is also takes a lot of time as well.
Mm.
So it slowed down my process to get creative all over again as far as like putting new stories out. So for me, it was just kind of having to be patient and being able to understand that this is also needed to make sure this first issue finds an audience, finds a life. Because if that doesn't happen, then there is no part two, there is no part three. So with me, yeah, I've had to be able to make sure I put my full focus on what I'm particularly doing at that time and making sure that whatever I do put out there is at the highest quality because I think you make your first impression obviously once and you want it to be a good one. And so I think that's what went along with when I was talking to you about how people reacted to seeing my project, my stories. They really were invested off of the first issue, and also people coming to me that were like, hey, I like never even had interest in the Western genre, but the way you wrote, the way you brought the characters made me want to know what happens next, made me want to get that next issue. So I think that's what the main motivation was, to see those reactions from people that normally wouldn't even pick up your book.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. So that's it. I think, and I got to compliment you. I don't think we've ever had that conversation. It's just like you took what I said and you ran with it. Like, I think you did such a great job with the campaigns and, just the release of the book and everything. It was just amazing to watch you put everything together. So I really got to commend you for that because I think, it had a strong release. You're already how many issues into it, and like it's such a good book, and I think you're developing such a great fan base for it already. And it's landing in all the right hands, and I think it's going to go in all the right places and continue to do so. So I really just want to give hats off to you.
No, I appreciate you saying that. And I mean, to be honest, one of the biggest motivations was having that one first conversation with you, because I didn't feel like I was doing it on my own anymore, and I was able to ask you questions. It wasn't like an email thing. You were like, "Hey, text me, call me whenever." So I appreciated that camaraderie. And does that makes me think, like, who was your inspirations or who was your mentors when you first started?
Ooh, that's a good question. I don't know. I don't think. I mean, I had plenty of inspirations, like Stanley, of course, the guy who started it all. Um, Marvel, Spider-Man, all that stuff. He was like one of probably my biggest inspiration, just because I grew up watching all the cartoons, reading the books and stuff like that. But once I actually got into the industry, even just starting out as a teenager, I don't think there was really that many mentors. I know I had a lot of people who supported me and who I'd work on projects, and they would see that I was a really young guy and they would just really give me encouragement. But, there wasn't really anybody to like ask questions to. I think it was just because of the time it was, because this would have been like 2009, 2010.
Right.
It was an indie market, but it wasn't like it is now. Everything was just sort of bare bones starting out, and you really have to figure it out on your own. And I think I've just been blessed to be able to work with some people who are very well versed in what they do, or they're open to learning. And I think that's important because there have been so many projects like Leaders of the Free World that I did with my friend Corey Pruitt, where he hadn't worked on, like, he'd written books before, but he'd never actually done one on the scale that he was trying to do with what we ended up doing with Leaders of the Free World. And so he'd never done a Kickstarter campaign. I think I had done a couple of them at that point. And he used his expertise, I used my expertise, and we kind of met somewhere in the middle to just be able to be like, I don't know what we're going to do, but we're going to figure this out. Like, it's good to have a partnership with somebody who really has your back. And I would recommend that too. Like, if there's a mentor, if there's somebody you can find that at least has a little bit more knowledge in an area that you don't, you
Right.
know, feel free to pick their brain, like get on good terms with them, like make friends. I think you can't have enough friends in this industry, whether it's just books, whether it's, film and TV. I think you can't have enough friends.
No, and that's the intention with this project here with Destino. I just want to contribute and to be able to show the camaraderie and that we all have each other's backs whenever we need it. And that's what we're here for. And to give information. I mean, I know it's a little bit easier than when we were starting out, but it's always nice to hear it firsthand from people that lived it and people that are doing this now.
Yeah, and I'm excited to see, all the people that you're going to bring on board for this as well, because I always still say I'm always learning. I'm still a student of the game, so whenever somebody's giving out information, I always want to sit down and listen. I don't think you're ever too established to learn something new, And so I'm just looking forward to seeing how everything pans out and all the great talent and all the great knowledge that's going to be available through Destino. And actually, I did want to ask you a question. How did you come about the name Destino Foundation?
Sorry, go one more time.
How did you come about the name Destino Foundation? I'm kind of curious about that one.
Destino, that word has always like kind of inspired me, like destiny.
Mhm.
And so it just made me feel ambitious. And it like, since I connected with that word so much, I decided to brand it and put it as the face of this project to hopefully use it to inspire other people and to kind of like bring other people on board.
I love that. That's great. It's simple, it's clean, it's such a good name. I love it.
Thank you, Eli. I'm really glad we got to do this and that you're on board with us, and I really enjoyed our chat.
And pleasure to be here. You know, I always say if you need me for anything, just let me know. And that goes for, you know, all the people who are coming aboard too. Like it's an open door. Like I'm always happy to share whatever I know, and I'm always happy to learn from everybody else. So it's a pleasure to be on board.
Thank you, and likewise, I'm always there for you too, bro.
All right, appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.